Welcome to Commander Central, episode 263, and today we'll be taking a look at the power levels of our own decks. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
What's up, boys? How's it going today?
It's Friday.
It's been raining for like 4 days. It's wonderful.
And we have, I think, 4 more to come. So I went for a bike ride in the rain this morning, and I'm just finally drying out now.
Now you're going to get sick. And an anime that I was watching, the girl gets sick in the middle of summer, and she's like, only idiots get sick in the summer. I'm not sick.
And we have a guest coming to town. The infamous Ginger Joe is coming to visit next weekend.
Correct.
And I think we're going to try to get him on the show as well.
Yes.
So kind of looking forward to that, too. We'll definitely get some Magic played that weekend for sure.
For sure. It'll be a good weekend.
Yeah. But anyone get any cool games in this week?
I got to play a few last weekend, something like that.
Anything
and
fun happen?
I found out that a Chroma's Will is a broken card.
That card is so good.
You just are figuring this out?
Yeah, I was able to... I only play it in my Angels deck, because it fits Theme of Angels.
Sure.
And I one-shot the store owner for like 44 damage because I was able to give him the double strike, vigilance, whatever, lifelink, all that stuff. And I had like 5 Angels out, and I'm like, this is dumb. This card's broken.
That should show you how crazy good Jessica's Will is, that her Chroma's Will might not be the best one in the cycle. Yeah, that card's bonkers. I had a really fun play, or almost. It almost worked out for me when I was playing on stream the other night. Matt Morgan was playing AC, Tyrant of Gyre Straits, which is basically like the bigger Tatiova. And he had ramped out, I don't know, like 70 lands or something ridiculous, and built a board state that was not touchable and was like not going to be a problem that anyone could solve. And we needed to kill him basically this turn, or he was going to crack back and kill everyone. And it came back around to me, the one player before him, and I had nothing in play. I had no creatures. There's no way in my deck to give stuff haste. There was just no answer for me to take out these last 4 points of life. And I top decked a card called Mind Games. It's a single blue, and it has buyback of 2 and a blue, tap target artifact, creature, or land, which again doesn't help if I have nothing in play and no haste, except in my hand, I had a Throne of the God Pharaoh, where at the end of your turn, your opponents all take damage equal to the number of tapped creatures you control.
Oh no.
So I was, and I will preface it by saying I didn't quite get there, but I was able to, first I played an extra planar lens that I had in my hand to give me double mana. Then I was able to cast Talrand to get Talrand back out. Then I cast Mind Games with buyback to tap Talrand, and then that made a Drake because of the Mind Games, which went back to my hand. And then I cast it a second time and was able to tapped the first Drake I made, which made a second Drake, and cast it a third time to tap that Drake and make the fourth Drake. And I was out of mana.
Oh.
If I would have had one more single mana, I could have just cast it and not bought it back and just tapped the last Drake. But I couldn't. I could only get 3 of them tapped, and I couldn't attack with them.
See, and now this is where those improvised cards come into play, right?
I was so close. And I had blown up a land, someone's, whatever it was, a Nykthos or something earlier in the game. I'm like, had I just let that Nykthos sit, which wouldn't have been a good move, but like that 1 mana difference would have let me tap that 4th Drake, and that would have been the 4 damage to kill him off Throne of the God Pharaoh, but instead it was only 3, and I had to pass a turn, and he killed everybody.
See, Dana, if you would have ran Field of Ruin, you would have had a land back. It would have been done. Oh,
so close. But of all the ridiculous ways to almost pull out a kill on somebody, that was it. Tapping my own creatures just to get Throne of the God Pharaoh triggers. So if you out there in listener land want to reach out to us and tell us about any cool games you played or fun things you did, how would you go about doing that?
You can reach us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com. And you can also find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers such as the Decks You Play shows, which we have a slew of coming out over the next few weeks, along with guesting on the show or just joining our community to chat with us and play some virtual EDH.
And we're also going to give away on Twitter one of the cool Phyrexian text swamps from the Jumpstart set last year that would go very nicely with your new Phyrexian text Praetors that just got announced this week. And
oh, don't even get me started on that.
Those are pretty cool. And that was supposed to be posted on Twitter last week, but right before the show started, Max and I were both like, did you post that? No, I thought you were going to. So I will make sure before the show goes out that we do post that giveaway on Twitter.
We're only human, people. We're only human.
Yes, mistakes happen.
Maybe I should post it on Twitter since I'm not active on social media. And then everyone's going to be like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on.
And then we announce the winner. And Chris, why did you win this? Huh? Never responded.
So what did you think of the Phyrexian Praetors, Chris?
I like them all except for the Elish Norn part.
Agreed.
And it has nothing to do with the monetary value or anything of the card. It has to do with the fact that that was a judge exclusive card. And I believe that judges work their butts off enough and they need some sort of, like a thank you from Wizards. And them doing this, which is now the third time that they've done this, it just kind of seems like a slap in the face to judges, in my opinion.
I 100% agree. I think that judge foil rewards given to judges should not feature art that gets reprinted elsewhere. I understand in this weird case, because they wanted to do the rest of the cycle, they couldn't have just left Elish Norn out. So I guess it's kind of forgivable. But I just wish they would
different art or something.
Right.
I mean,
well, that's true. Yeah, good point. Yeah, they could have used some new art for it. Yeah, that's a good point. But like it happened, I remember I had a friend of mine from the shop who had a Hannah Ship's Navigator deck, and he was super excited about that the judge foil art for that card, and paid a pretty good price for it. And he wasn't even like upset once it got reprinted with the same art that the value went down. He was just annoyed that like he thought it was going to be this really cool, unique piece of art that you would only have if you were somebody who really liked the deck and wanted to chase it down. And so he bought it from a judge, and it's now worth next to nothing, and that art is everywhere if we're playing Hannah because it's been reprinted 3 times. So yeah, no, I'm 100% in agreement with you there.
Yep, I've looked at a lot of the Twitter posts about it, and everyone, they're talking about, well, cards need to be reprinted, and I understand that,
Yeah.
I just hope that people sit back and look at, like if you've never been to a competitive Magic tournament to see what those judges have to go through, or if you don't have friends who are judges, maybe talk to one of them and see, 12-hour days where they're busting their butts and they get paid next to nothing. So I mean, it'd be nice to see them get something out of this.
Yeah, completely with you there. And Chris, as our resident D&D player, did you see any of the Forgotten Realms cards that got previewed this week?
So I saw, what was it, Vorpal Sword? I think there's only like 7 of them, right? Something like that's been spoiled so far.
Yeah, because we got a couple of the legends yesterday. We got Loth, the Spider Queen, and we got...
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Where's Scryfall?
Yeah,
Gotta
it's super
find
cool.
this.
Well, and one neat thing they're doing, they did too, that I was a little confused about, but then they explained it in a tweet, was some of the lore characters are getting Planeswalker cards, even though, like, canonically they are not Planeswalkers. It was just the best way to give them abilities. So, like, she is a Planeswalker card, even though it's not going to be, like, she's not hopping planes or anything. It's just, that was the best way to represent having, like, the Spider God have a bunch of abilities.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because if you read anything within the Forgotten Realms, all the gods have the abilities to go between, like the prime, the prime plane, the material plane, all the other planes. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the previews have been very cool so far, and some of the alt art stuff we've seen that look like they're from like the old 80s Monster Manual stuff is super cool if you are somebody who played D&D as a kid and just remember the way the art and stuff looked back then. I was looking forward to the set, but like that has me really hyped, like seeing the old Beholder art and stuff from way back in the Monster Manual days showing up on stuff is a really nice idea on their part.
Yeah, I was really hoping they weren't going to print like named characters per se. But I see that they are. I was hoping it'd be more of a flavor text thing, but oh well.
You kind of knew they were going to wind up going that route, though. I mean, so it's cool. I'm kind of looking forward to it. And we got a few more modern master previews starting to get through too, so we won't delve into that yet because I'm sure we'll talk about that on a show here in the next couple of weeks. So should we just jump into the main show topic here?
Sure. What are we talking about again today?
Power level. And we've done this before in like the abstract. This is what a power level is like. We actually had Rafael Garcia, our editor, on, and we talked about it, I don't know, a year-ish ago. But we wanted to talk about power level. And actually, this was your idea, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah.
Yes. It was brought up to me by a person in the shop who is a newer Commander player or whatever. And due to the fact that our shop, overall, our meta has been doing a nice little maybe a power creep. It seems more like a power struggle is what it is. Like people
Sure.
are trying to outdo each other. And he was curious about like what we deem, power scale. And Dana, you actually got to play with him on Tuesday. His name's Kyle.
Oh, sure.
And he said that playing with you and the other guys in the pod, it seemed more normal compared to other people that he plays with. And I was like, okay, that's what we try to do is we build it within a certain scale so everyone has a fun game. And that's what he wanted to discuss, have us discuss is how we do it, what we consider, where we should be in power level, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. And yeah, Kyle was playing decks that were roughly on par with everyone that I played with that night, at least in that case. So nothing was kind of out of bounds in regards to decks that got played. But yes, there were people at different tables that were playing things that were much faster, where his decks would have struggled much more than they did in the decks in the tables we were playing at. So
yes,
for sure. And also, like, to be clear, we're not going to disparage anyone's preferred power level. It's just this was a case where we had a player who was seeing decks that were stronger than he was accustomed to, and people really weren't communicating that to him clearly. So we want to talk a little bit about maybe how we've arrived at our deck's power, like how we rate our decks, and if someone thinks we are overrating or underrating how powerful they are, feel free to chime in and let us know. It's a good exercise, I think, to hear people talk about their own decks and what they think they're at versus what you think they're at too.
Don't worry, Dana. I have to chime in on one of your decks right away.
Okay. Well, I know which one you're going to chime in on, and it's on my list of ones to talk about here. So,
and the very first two words of it says exactly what I'm going to contradict.
Okay. So we're going to use the kind of traditional power scale you hear, which is like the 1 through 10 power, which is kind of ridiculous because I've literally never heard anyone call their deck anything but maybe a 5 if it's a pre-con. So a power scale where you're not using half the numbers is kind of a ridiculous power scale.
Yes.
I would just recommend a 1 through 5 power scale, but I'm not the person who set the kind of game standard that we're using right now. So we will be using that where everyone goes basically 6 through 10 for the most part, where 10 is CEDH, 9 is just under CEDH, 8 and 7 are kind of in an optimized range, and 5 is a pre-con, 6 is basically a good pre-con level.
I've seen gumball decks that run around the, 8 power range, so that 1 to 10 scale is like worthless in my opinion.
I mean, and that's why one of the things I've encouraged people to do is to talk a little bit more in detail about what their deck does too, because it is totally subjective. And it's not even a matter where you can look at the cards. If you look at a deck filled with, 2-drop 2/2s, that looks really weak. But if those 2-drop 2/2s are all elves in an elf deck with a bunch of synergies, then that changes the power of it. So,
sure does.
I mean, just looking at the cards doesn't necessarily tell you anything. The person who's playing them, a brand new player playing a 6-power deck can make it look like a 5. A really good player playing a 6-power deck can make it look like an 8.
Mm-hmm.
I always think back, we have a really good modern player, a really good limited player in our shop who's day 2'd a whole bunch of different GPs just playing limited, playing draft kind of decks.
I know this person.
And super nice guy too. I've multiple times just gotten stomped by him in pre-releases with card pools that don't look remotely powerful.
Yep.
But he understands how to take these card pools of mediocre cards and combine them in ways that make for a really effective limited deck. So just looking at what he's playing doesn't tell the true story. The way he assembles it and the way he plays it and the things he understands about playing limited make that deck way stronger than it would appear just handing it to me, for example.
Exactly. Well, I've actually seen him play Commander too, and he says that he doesn't want to anymore because his deck is, the decks that he plays are so powerful and no one ever has fun. And he's not even having fun with it because he's like, yeah, I know these cards are really, really good and broken. And he's like, it's just not fun.
And he's the nicest guy in the world too. So totally get it. So anyway, those are the caveats we're throwing out there. A lot of this stuff is really relative compared to a whole bunch of other factors. We'll try to be as exact as we can given, those constraints. So Max, we throw it to you. What's the first deck of yours you want to talk about here?
So I'm going to start with my Dragonlord Jamoka deck. It's probably the deck I play most frequently with new players or people I'm unfamiliar with just because I don't care if I win or lose with this deck. I just always have fun with it. I would probably rank this deck I'm going to be really the cliche. It's a 7. I hate to say that, but it's a 7.
I would have called it a 7. I mean, that makes sense to me.
And here's my reasoning is because it is a deck that every creature in the deck flies. And some decks that I run up against can't deal with flyers. So that's already a negative for that player in my pod. The other portion of the fact is that it runs a lot of removal, whether it's targeted or mass removal. There is at least a dozen pieces of removal in this deck because it plays more like a control deck than like an aggro deck. And then the final side of why I rated a 7 is because this deck can fall on its face if I keep a bad hand or I hit a land pocket or whatever. If I don't get the right sequence of card draw spells or just can't get anything going, I'm a sitting duck. And it also tends to put a target on myself if I am doing well because it's a life gain deck. I'm the player at the pod that sits there at 50, 60 life most of the time, so I'm always being targeted.
Well, and also, particularly to maybe someone who's a little bit newer, the fact that you're turning off their ability to cast spells on your turn when your commander's out also kind of puts a target on you a little bit at least.
That has never been a problem, Daniel.
You're like, I'm going to factor fiction for you in your turn. You're like, yeah, you can't do that.
No constant mist.
I would agree with that completely. That's 7 power. I think all those factors are worth considering, but it's not particularly fast. Like that deck, I don't know if you would have a way to kill the table before turn 8. Like
if I'm lucky, yeah.
Yeah, like if you goldfished against like people who were not there. Like if you just like set up your dream hand and stacked it the way you wanted it to, I'm not sure if you could kill 3 people before turn 8.
No, there's no way, not with his deck.
No, it would be the god hand and everybody else got the worst hand possible, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he'd have to turn 1 that angel who's like a 5/5 or something like that and start beating face immediately.
It's a monk. Sarah Ascendant is a monk.
Sarah Ascendant on turn 1, get your Black Blade Reforged onto it on turn 3 or something. You know, get a Berserk. Like you could technically maybe do it if literally every card was stacked the perfect way, but I mean, it's just not
right.
And no one else, and everyone else was napping.
Oh, I would love a nap.
Yeah. All right, Chris, what's the first one you want to talk about here?
It's a good question here. How about we'll just go into my tried and true deck, which is my Mogus Goddess Slaughter deck.
Mm-hmm.
This deck I am going to rate at about an 8.
Okay.
Due to the simple fact of this deck comes out swinging fast, hard, but never finishes a game. I can honestly say that it never actually wins the game, but it comes out and I'll dish out 80 damage by turn 10 or whatever, but then I'm dead. Like, I can never finish off the game with them. The other reason I'm rating this so high is due to the fact that my land base is extremely tweaked.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, it's very curve-centric. I'm playing 3 tutors in the deck. I have a bunch of card draw aspect in it. Protection. I mean, it's a very tweaked deck, so I consider it very high power. Now, I could make it much, much worse because I do have this wonderful little sideboard of cards that could go in and just, change the whole game plan too. But as it sits, this is what I'm deeming it at. Your guys' thoughts?
I don't even know if I'd call it an 8. I agree with what you're saying. Like, it definitely is on a clock. When you sit down at that deck, you're like, okay, something needs to occur in the next half a dozen turns here. I need to really keep Chris in check, or the game's just going to. Someone else is going to kill me. You're going to get me down to 12 life, and I'm going to get one shot by somebody else.
Yep.
But I don't know if I am even too worried about that being a power thing. I would maybe not to. Jesus, they're all 7s. It's easy to say it like that. All 6s.
We could. This show could be over. They're all 7s.
Yeah. But I feel like a real 8 power deck would probably have more answers, but maybe not. I mean, if I was a new player, I would say this. It would definitely feel like an 8 because it's just the amount of damage is just relentless, even if you can't win. So I guess I could maybe see that.
Yeah. The other thing why I want to deem this more higher than what you guys are saying is due to the simple fact that when you're playing this deck, a lot of people don't start factoring in things like, oh, it's just 2 damage. Oh, it's just 1 damage. And they don't think about that, which in turn, actually, that's what makes me think it's more powerful because they're taking so much damage, but they're not actually retaliating at all.
Yeah.
See, I disagree with you, Dana. I would call Mogus an 8. I think everything Chris said is spot on. It's a speed thing. Whether you've played against Chris's deck specifically or a Mogus deck in general, you already know the commander has that clock written on it.
Yeah.
And knowing how Chris plays that deck, every other card in that deck also has some sort of clock on it, whether it's,
sure.
The Fiery Emancipation along with a Torbrand, and then, there's just so many. It sounds like it's a good redundancy. Every card in that deck is pinging the entire table for damage every turn. And whether you said it correctly, you might not realize that, but by the time Chris is eliminated from the game, everybody's at 10 life. Unless you are, an Laurel player is at the table or something. But either Chris ends up winning those games, or Chris is the first one out and the game's going to be over in 3 turns. So I definitely think it is a deck that deserves that 8 power level because of how it impacts the entire pod. It can easily wipe out a table quickly just from the incidental damage.
Sure.
And then if it doesn't, the game still, you're going to be shuffling up shortly after, as long as the game because everybody's going to be at 10. So right. I definitely think it deserves that 8. It's a speed. It's the optimization of the deck. I think that's the best word. It is extremely optimized, but not optimized enough where Chris is casting a tutor every turn. It's not that level, but it is where if Chris needs a piece, he can go get it and he'll make that game get closer to the finish line quickly.
Okay. It also comes back to like what you were talking about, Dana, piloting of a deck too.
Yeah.
I've noticed the last couple times I play this deck, I look at my opening hand and I just keep it. Even if it's trash, just because I know how the deck plays. Like, last time I played it, I had a 1-land hand with Mana Vault and Ankh of Mishra. And I'm like, snap, keep, we'll play Ankh on turn 1, and then I proceeded to sit there for 3 turns with only 1 land. But I pinged everybody every turn when they played a land, so, massive amounts of damage. But I've learned that too, that as piloting, you can make something way more powerful or way less powerful depending on how you run it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know what? I will jump in since Chris threw his 8 out there. I will, I guess, throw my 8 out there too, which is my Reki The History of Kamigawa deck.
Oh, you're like 12 that you play?
It is not a 12.
So
I actually haven't played it in a long time, so I don't remember how powerful it is.
I mean, and it's not gotten weaker. I'll tell you that. Yeah, and it's fast, but we're talking fast for like a regular commander. I'm not playing the, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, Mox Opal, Chrome Mox level Mana Rocks to get stuff out super, super fast. So I'm like just using typical green mana for the most part. So I would say this would be on the optimized end of what you can get to before you break that line into CEDH. And I would feel comfortable when I think of 8s, I usually think of like that really good Corval deck that also isn't probably running the perfect Mana Rocks, but it's a really tuned Corval deck and it's going to, generate a ton of value and hit you in the face. Or a really tuned Tulane deck as well that isn't running the fast mana that you'd see from CDH and doesn't have the perfect removal, but is still really, really strong and really fast. I would feel relatively comfortable sitting with those decks with my Reki deck and maybe not win all of them, but I could feel like I had a chance to be in the game if things broke my way. So I would be comfortable calling that deck an 8. What's odd about it is, you talked about, Chris, with your deck and how you like do so much damage, and that's something that kind of looks intimidating. Or Max's Dromoka case, it's a bunch of flyers people can't necessarily deal with, and they can't cast spells in your turn, and that's a thing that registers as powerful in people's brains unless you actually see my Reki deck get played. Nothing about it looks scary. If I handed it to someone to flip through the cards,
the deck list does not look scary.
Right. It's not until I start kind of like storming off and like creature and draw 2 cards and a creature and draw a card and creature and draw a card and like get the board side out, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's 190 power on the field. Mm-hmm. So that's a weird thing about it, is it's probably until you actually see it play, it doesn't look as powerful probably as it is. What do you guys think about that?
I don't know. Out of all the decks that I've played against of yours, it's probably the most powerful.
I would say my Edric deck is probably stronger.
Oh, I forgot you had that deck.
But I don't. Right, I don't really. Not really count it because like that's probably the closest I have to an actual CEDH deck, and I just so rarely play it. But yes, of my actual decks I play, this is probably my strongest, I would say.
Yep, and I think it also comes into the issue of, so that deck in particular, seeing how you're playing so many creature base in it, there's not enough removal in the game. Like,
correct.
No one's playing, unless you're playing against our store owner, Phil, who plays a Planeswalker deck where he plays 37 board wipes.
Right.
Then you have enough removal, but a good, solidly tuned deck is not playing enough removal to deal with everything that you're doing.
Well, and that's another thing about it, too. It's very resilient in addition to being fast. I think the last time I played it on our stream, I had a, big dumb board state and somebody board wiped and I couldn't stop it. I didn't have a heroic intervention or anything in hand. It came back around to me and I was like, okay, dropped an extra planar lens and played the land for turn and ramped up a land and played Reki again and creature and refilled my hand entirely. And the board, everyone else's board is empty from the wrath. And like I rebuilt back to where I was immediately, which is a thing that deck does really well too. So it's very resilient, which is another reason it's definitely, I would say, definitely at least an 8. What do you think, Max?
So I brought the deck list up because it has been a while since I've seen you play this deck either on your Wednesday night streams or on our, once a month Saturday night spell table games. And I think that's the thing is you are playing the best color in Magic.
Sure.
And your commander says, draw a card on it.
Boo.
Granted, you would think, oh, play a legendary spell. That might be a weird, like, crutch you kind of have to build around. No, you don't, because every legendary card in this deck does something scary on its own. And so you are just creating an army of scary things. It's not like you have to worry. It's not like someone building an army of angel tokens and then dropping that Cathar's Crusade. You're just dropping things like a Docin that does the Dromoka, or lets people play one spell per turn, or only during their turn. You have Galta in there. You have, a questing beast to make sure your damage can get through, on top of all these artifacts that people don't realize are legendary. So these pieces in a non-Recce deck that are just utility and help the machine get going, you're double, triple dipping off of these, because not only is Gauntlet of Power doubling your mana, that's not legendary. Not only is the Great Henge, doing Great Henge things, you also drew a card off of it just by casting it.
Right.
Not ETB, cast. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is that Recce is a cast trigger, not an enter the battlefield. I think if you had to worry about spells resolving it, I think it'd still be an 8. You just find a way to make sure your spells would always resolve. I think the 8 is definitely worthwhile. I don't think it is considered CEDH just because it doesn't have those key pieces. It doesn't have those exact lines of play like most CEDH decks do, but it definitely is a deck that you always have to keep an eye on, or else it is just gonna take over very quickly.
I think we're all in agreement on that one. Max, what's your next one you want to talk about here?
I'm going to talk about my newest deck, and that's my Psi Master Thopterus deck. I built this late last year, late 2020, and it's all about clones and making Thopters off of Psi. I'm going to rank this a 5, because although it has things like your Mana Crypt and your Mana Vaults for the fast mana, I don't want to play them on turn 1, because they aren't going to do anything with Psi not being on the battlefield. I do have a couple tutors, but the fact that the majority of my creatures are clones, if I don't have a board state, or if my opponents don't have anything worth cloning, those are dead cards in my hand. Like, I just can't do anything with them, and I end up discarding them. And it's a deck that likes to do a lot of little things, but I have yet to find a good way to just smack someone for a win without taking a 15-minute turn to figure out the sequencing of clones and how many Thopters need to attack and stuff like that.
I would say it's a deck where you put the theme before you put power. Like your first choice was, I want it to do this. I want to have these kind of cards and these kind of cards in it and do this kind of thing. And then I will figure out what I'm going to do with that to turn that into a win later on. But your primary concern was making it a thematic deck, which I tend to agree tends to put decks around in that 5-6 tops level. And it plays fine. I've played against it. It plays fine, but absolutely, like it doing its thing is more important than it winning a game.
For sure.
And Chris, have you seen this one in play yet?
I have not. Max has talked about it quite a bit. I've looked at the deck list overall, and for me, blue just always seems like a clunky deck build. Like, just because I'm not a blue player, so blue's always been clunky for me. So I can see what he's talking about. Because, like, he doesn't, well, I take it back. He does play Brago and stuff like that, but that's a different version of blue. So blue artifacts, just, I don't know.
Yeah, and particularly if it's not really a control deck, which is kind of blue's strength too.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, what's your next one here?
Should we go super low power level too? Let's go low power level with this one as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my Amanatu deck, which is actually, it's in hiding right now because it needs to be redone. And this deck, I'm going to deem this deck around the 6 to 7 range at the absolute most, because it's horrendous. I mean, horrible deck. Horrible deck. This deck was built to base off of your Jeru deck, where we're only running X amount of creatures, then all planeswalkers. Well, I turned this into an Approach of the Second Sun deck. So pretty much all I do is my planeswalkers are meant to draw cards, and that's it. They don't do anything else. So it's pretty much like a combo deck based around one card, where if anything happens, you just kind of lose the game. There's not much else that you can win the game with. So that's why I'm deeming this a low power, because I have one win con and nothing else, and I just kind of fold if anyone stops it.
It's also not one of those decks, like I've definitely seen those decks with one win con, but they're built much more around protecting or getting to that win con.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times that's how CDH plays, right? They're trying to win with Thassa's Oracle or something, and the entire deck is revolving around getting to Thassa's Oracle or protecting Thassa's Oracle.
Yes.
And your approach deck is not doing that.
I think I play like maybe 3 counter spells, and the ones that I'm playing are supposed to be in there mainly to draw me cards, like they're versatile ones, like your Cryptic Command, your Mystic Confluence,
Sure.
that type of stuff, so I can use them as card draw over the counterspell aspect, unless I'm in absolute dire straits and I need the counterspell.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I agree, having played against that deck, it definitely also is a situation where like that deck is much more concerned about doing the thing than it is about winning necessarily.
Yep, I just, that's when it turns into politics, where I'm like, I'm not the bad guy. Look at that guy over there playing Reki. That's the one you need to worry about. Don't worry about me.
Have you played against this one at Chris's, Max?
It would have been a long time ago when we were still in the before 4 times.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah,
this deck's trash.
Well, I was not going to go in this sequence, but I guess the couple of decks I was going to talk about, I've reshuffled them around, and I'm going to go from strongest to least in power ranking here as I talk about them. The next one will probably be my Kettison Crom deck, which is also relatively new. It's 8-ish months or so old, maybe a little bit more than that now. I built it last year at some point, originally as Adelaise, and started making it into a Crom deck, which basically meant changing out a couple spells in the commander, and then Kettison was spoiled, and it was just a perfect match. I don't think it's quite an 8, but it's at least a 7, and it probably falls somewhere in the middle. There aren't really any notable cards in it. There's a Volcanic Island, and that's maybe the only card in it that's remotely scary. I guess Fierce Guardianship as one of my counterspells to protect when I'm going for the win. But beyond that, the deck doesn't look particularly frightening. When I was in the Play EDH Discord server, they had a thing where you had to get your decks rated before you could play, and they called it a mid-tier. I think that's a little bit underselling it too. And I think the reason for that is because you mentioned looking at my Reki deck, Max, and you're like, oh, well, there's a bunch of legends in here, and yes, that seems like a downside, but they're all legends that do good things.
Yeah.
Looking at my Kettison Crom deck, there's just a bunch of absolute trash cards in here that you wouldn't think would be remotely effective. Bloodlust, to give a creature above mine +4/-4 to end a turn, Run Amok, Rush of Blood, Titan Strength. Like, I have a ton of these like buffs in here that seem inconsequential until you realize the deck is built around copying those and copying those and copying those, and suddenly my Crom goes from a 4/4 to like a 22/22, and Kettison makes it deal that damage to everyone simultaneously. So this is a good example of one where like looking at the cards doesn't necessarily tell you the full story.
Yes. And
the main reason I would maybe not call it an 8 is it's just not resilient at all. Like, there's 2 creatures there's 1 creature aside from the commanders in the entire deck, so there's 2 commanders partners in the command zone and 1 additional creature. I have a lot of draw, but like a couple board wipes, and I'm gonna have a really tough time poking through damage on anybody when it's gonna cost me 12 mana to recast my commander and I don't have any blockers or anything.
Yep. Yeah, from what you're saying, this deck's very susceptible to a crackback, which is what makes it way too weak compared to what, an 8, like what you're saying.
Yeah. But I think it's pretty close just because it is fast. Like, there's definitely situations where the turn 7 can roll around and no one's ready, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, when I've hit nobody, everyone dies. So that's the only reason I would say possibly an 8, because I think that definitely seems strong, particularly to outsiders. Max, you've seen this deck the most. What do you think?
I love this deck. This is like chaos in a bottle, in my opinion, because you said it right. There's 1 other creature in the entire deck. So, like, you are totally reliant on your commanders to win the game. And I think I agree. It's not quite an 8, but I think it's more than a 7 just because of your piloting abilities. I think this call gets the grade because of how you pilot the deck. I know if I were to be handed this deck, it would be like a 4, because it's like, what do I do? I have a bunch of these like Titan Strengths in my hand and 2 lands, and what do I do? I would probably say this is like a 7.75, because every time I've seen this deck, you play it, you sandbag. Like, that's the only word I can think of.
Yeah, for sure.
You have to sandbag until you have, the 7 mana to get Kettison and Crom out and cast, 2 or 3 instants within a chain of a few turns.
Yes.
So you definitely show what's going to happen the minute one of them hits the field. You kind of can get ready. It's like coming soon. And then if you aren't, you just got to hope that someone else plays something scarier to take the direction off of you. And then come next turn, you have all these cards in your hand and a way to copy them, and the game's over. And it hits you like a freight train, or else you fall off the tracks. And I really like that kind of deck every now and then to either play or play against, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite call it an aggro deck, because I'm not going to come out in the first 5 turns fast, because I can't. I need to sandbag a little bit. You're right. It's not an aggro deck until it is an aggro deck.
The fact that you commented saying your commanders could end up costing 12 mana, I'm surprised you aren't running Command Beacon.
You know what? In hindsight, I probably should be. That's a good point. I will take a look at that. It's a good point because it can get to that point with Crom. So yeah, no, that's a good call. I might have to look at that. All right. Well, Max, we'll come back to you. What's your next one you want to talk about here?
I'm going to talk about my Regnan Krav deck. This is all about making tokens for Krav to eat to do what I like to do best and kill people with my commander. I would call this like a 6.5 because it's a slow deck. It isn't something that comes out of the gate quick. It's like Dramoka. I'm not doing anything quite boards, like very scary until turn 5. Turn 6 maybe. But I do have a lot of tutors in the deck. You know, I run Vampiric Tutor, I run Enlightened Tutor, I run Demonic Tutor. So I have a bunch of tutors in the deck to go find my key pieces. And I do have combos in the deck. I run Blood Bond. I run a lot of kind of stacks pieces like the Authority of the Consuls or the Blind Obedience. So it's a pain to deal with, but it also isn't something that you have to deal with right away. And the fact that I haven't found that perfect balance of creatures that inherently have lifelink to kind of pad my life total versus creatures that inherently make tokens or can help my token army grow. It's a weird balancing act, but it's getting there, and I love playing it. I love that partners with command mechanics, so I was happy to find a set I liked. But I wouldn't call this anything over like a 6.5.
So my question for you on that then, what do you deem CEDH then? Because everything that you stated pretty much falls into the category of CEDH as far as everything that I've ever heard from people. And I could be wrong. All you listeners, you can hit me up on Slack or Twitter or whatever, and correct me as what you guys think it is. But running stacks, running tutors, running combos, isn't that just what CEDH falls into?
So I think, to answer the question, I think the relevant part is definitely speed.
Okay.
And Max's deck just doesn't have the speed there. I think really to play a CDH deck, the vast majority of the time, there's definitely exceptions, and I'm also certainly no expert. The mana rocks make a massive difference where everyone is running things like the Mox Opal and the Mox Diamond and the Chrome Mox and whatever. Like they have those 0-drop mana rocks that generate huge mana that make a big difference. And most of those decks tend to run a couple of different like weird packages too. So like they're running Dramatic Scepter package to do a thing with that, and they're running Dockside Extortionist package, ways to blink that because everyone has a gazillion rocks. So like if you can get Dockside out and blink it, the value you generate is fantastic. Max's deck has like I understand what you're saying. There's those elements he described are there, but the speed and the resiliency and just some of the cards you see at a CDH environment, it's just not. It's not that.
Okay.
And even the stacks elements are pretty light.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking Authority of the Consuls and Blind Obedience. Those are the two.
Which are even more attacks in a stack.
And like,
I was going to say, I don't really consider those stacks then.
And it's also, I think, I don't tutor for Blood Blonde. I don't tutor for,
Liar. I've watched you do it once.
I've done it once.
And that's because the game went on forever and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to tutor it up.
Yeah. But like, my lines for tutors are never the same. It's not, I know if I have a tutor by turn 5, and this is in play or in my hand, I know I can go get X card to win the game.
Yep.
So I will say this, Max, here's the difference. And I'm guessing we're going to discuss your Brago deck here at some point.
Maybe.
When you pull out your Brago deck, I think to myself, ooh, okay, there's only a couple decks I have that can hang with your Brago deck. When you pull out your partner's deck, I'm like, okay, I can play whatever I want to play. As long as it's not too strong. Like, I wouldn't play Reki against it, but I'm like, I just built this new test deck, and Max's deck is probably better than mine, but I'm not going to feel like I got blown out.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Like a brand new deck I just put together that I felt like that I didn't know how it played, and it was probably pretty weak because I haven't tweaked it yet. I would be hesitant to play that against Brago because I'm thinking I would get blown out. But I don't feel like I would against Regnan Krav. It's
like chess, Dana. Once you start shuffling the deck, you're stuck with it for that round. So
right, yeah, there we go. Yep. Once your hand is off the
piece, you made your move.
All right, Chris, what's your next one here?
We'll talk about my homegirl Alesha.
Nice.
So I've had Alesha together for quite a few years, and I've changed this deck a lot. The current iteration, I'm going back into my token themes right now, but the one that I have up on my Architect is more of your Reanimator theme. Your ETB, copy ETB triggers, reanimate stuff with her. That was what the theme was originally. The way I have it set up on Architect, I would deem this deck right around the 7 to 8 range again. Due to the simple fact of it is a highly tuned mana base. I have a bunch of tutors in here, plus reanimate spells, and I am playing combo base. and I am not shy to tutor up my combo if that's how the board state's sitting. So that's where I'm seeing this sit at. I don't know if you guys see it the same way as me, but that's just the last couple times I played this deck, in the version that it's sitting on Archidect, it just seemed almost overly powerful compared to the people that I was playing against.
Yeah, I've never felt like it was overpowered when I played against it. But resilient is a good word. It absolutely bounces back real quick. What do you think, Max?
Yeah, I definitely think resilient the bounce back is what is more important because of Alesha's ability. Like, you don't care if your stuff dies because it's going to come back. And I think out of all the versions you've had, my favorite is the token, like the Army in the Can version, just because you get that double dip again. You know, you cast the creature the first time, you make your tokens. Oh, you block with it, it dies, and then you swing with Alesha and bring it back, and you get more tokens and an extra body. So, like, I always enjoy playing against Alesha, especially that version, because it's, you know, the decks I like to play against the most are the ones that make me play. They bring out the best Magic play out of myself. So, like, playing against Reki or playing against Alesha, you know, I have to kind of be on my B+ game at least, because I need to be paying attention. I need to be able to know what's going on. And those decks definitely bring out the best as a player in me. And I think Alesha, I've never really thought has been overpowered, but it is a challenging puzzle to solve.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to what Max just said. That completely is what I would agree with. It was one of those decks too, like, I don't think the power of it is apparent until you've played it. And even then, it's one of those decks where a newer player, I think, like, you might beat plenty of people and win plenty of games, but it never feels like it's out of hand. I always feel like, oh yeah, he just made a bunch of tokens and got a bunch of value and overran me, but next time, if things go just right, I can win that game. And maybe you're wrong, maybe you can't, but like, it feels that way. Whereas there's some decks sometimes where you're like, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to lose this deck every time with this one I'm playing. And I don't think your Alesha deck doesn't make you feel like it's hopeless. It always feels like, if things just break my way, I can turn this one around.
Yeah, because I've been really trying to find the happy median with this deck, because like, I see all these cards to put in, I'm like, oh, that's just too strong. No, that's too strong. That's too strong. And I was really curious on this one. I
feel like, yes, I think at least for the power level I prefer to play at, which is in that 6 to 7 range, that one hits that sweet spot really nicely, I think. The next one I'm going to discuss, and I'm really kind of curious about, because I think this is the one I have the most difficult time of all my decks evaluating, is my Asperia Sphinx Tribal deck.
My nemesis.
And this is one I tend to warn people. I give them a heads up about. It's one of the ones, like, there's not much to say about Kettison Kram or even Reki. I can tell them what the power is, but like, there's no specific cards to worry about or warn people about necessarily. Asperia's got a couple things in it. Like, I want to say, hey, there's a Tundra in this deck that's a little bit intimidating to newer players. There's a Mana Drain in there. And I also mention I'm running like 6 or 7 counter spells, just because I don't mind giving information away. I'm not going to tell people out there you have to announce that information when you're playing. I don't think you need to tell people how many counter spells you're playing. I prefer to at least give them a rough idea, because there's 6 or 7 counter spells. You're like, okay, well, this is just a game with 6 or 7 counter spells. Versus, like, if someone's got 25 counter spells in a deck, I just might not be in the mood for that.
Yeah, we're talking you brawl players.
Yeah. And that's, again, I'm not like, if that's what you want to do and that's your jam, and that's cool. There's just going to be times I'm not in the mood to deal with it. I had a bad day at work. I just don't want to have 3 out of 4 spells countered. And I'm assuming the same is true of most people. So I like to give the heads up at least and say, hey, there's counter spells in here, but there's like half a dozen. So where things get weird with this deck is it's quite slow and doesn't look like it's going to do very much. And I play a Sphinx or I play 2 Sphinxes, and suddenly it's turn 8 or 9 and you're just screwed, because I've drawn enough cards and I'm in a position where now I can start controlling the board and doing what I want to do. And next thing you know, there's 30 damage in the air coming at you that you can't deal with.
Yeah, it's very similar to Max's Dromoka deck in the fact that it's a bunch of big flyers smacking you in the face that you just can't deal with.
And they all have 5 lines of text on them.
If not more.
If not more, right. So what do you think of this one, Max?
I think it's probably like Dromoka. It's a 7. Dromoka has that ability of you can't cast spells on my turn. Your version of that is you get to play blue. You get to play counter spells.
Yeah.
So you do have to dedicate slots in the deck to those. And I think the fact that you run around half a dozen is a great number. It's not dreadful to play against, like, oh, I have to deal with 13 counter spells and none of them are cancel, versus there's 6 of them, and yeah, they're probably 6 really good ones, maybe like Mana Drain or Fierce Guardianship or Pact of Negation, but you at least know there's a finite number.
Right.
And I think the fact that how that deck tends to win is, when True Conviction hits the field and you're swinging with 4/8/8s or whatever, that there are, just from the repetitiveness of playing against it, I know what to watch for.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, I don't know. I think it's fine. I think it's a cool deck. It's that Sphinxes is an underloved tribe, and the fact that you went blue-white gave you access to a few of the old school white ones that I don't think you run anymore. But
I had to, because there weren't so many. 6 years ago, I was like, there was only a handful of Sphinxes in the game.
Because wasn't the mono white one didn't fly, right?
I had Petra Sphinx in there, and I even had like the Sarah Sphinx, which is just a Sarah Angel that's a Sphinx, just because there was only like literally when I built the deck, I think there was 25 Sphinxes they had in the game. So yeah, the pickings were pretty slim.
Yeah, I think it's fun. It like Chris said, it reminds me a lot of Jamoka. Just in a different color combination. Well,
here was the situation I had at the shop when I played with it this week. We got to that point in the game where like I felt like I was a little bit in control, and there was a player with a Locust God out who had made, half a dozen, more than that, probably 10 or 12 Locust God tokens. But I had Wind Reader Sphinx out, which draws a card whenever any creature with flying attacks. And I had Asperia out, which draws a card whenever I get attacked.
Oh no.
And I was holding on to a couple of counter spells too, and it's like, this is just not, there's no way you're screwed. You don't, like, nothing you can do. If you swing on those locusts, I'm just going to draw, and eventually he had to swing. Like, it got to the point in the game where he had to take a wild shot at me. And I'm like, okay, well, so you're attacking. I'm going to draw 44 cards or something crazy like that I drew. And like, oh, and there's the Aetherize.
Oh, no.
And just pop the Locusts back, and that was the end of the game. I mean, like, but like, the deck tends to do that kind of thing where you get to that point where it's gone long enough, and there's just too much value. So
it's a deck where you win via defense.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Between defense and 6 lines of text and every Sphinx.
So this talk right here is what's leading me into seeing why people don't like discussing power level per se anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Something that was brought up to me, like, people don't talk about power level anymore, blah, 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 all that stuff. And now I understand this a little bit better due to the fact that, so Asperia, we're deeming her at this certain power level, but if you get to the late game, which is where everyone wants to play, we want to play 10 or 12 turns, each. This deck just has such a more high win percentage.
Yes.
Whereas, if we didn't discuss power level, I could pull up my mono red goblins deck that runs much faster, and your deck can't do anything.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's very, very nuanced, and that's why I definitely encourage people to like err on the side of giving out too much information.
Yep.
Because I would rather lose a game because I gave out too much information than win a game and have someone feel bad because they weren't prepared for what was going to happen, and they didn't have the suitable deck.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yep.
So, well, hopefully that at least gave people some context for like how we look at our decks and how we talk about them. And I'm curious to hear back if anyone's played against our decks, if you have any thoughts on how kind of we evaluated them, and what you do when you have your Rule Zero conversation with people as well, what information you give away, how you evaluate your own decks, that kind of thing. Any final thoughts here from either of you two before we wrap it up?
I wish that this was something that we didn't have to discuss.
Sure.
And everyone was on the same page type of deal. Because I just want to sit down, just enjoy the games. I don't want to have to sit down and be like, oh, you're playing the new Witherbloom deck or whatever. So I know you're playing, turn 3 combos in it, and I have nothing with me that's that power level. I wish everyone was on the same the same mindset of, we want to play X amount of turns. I want this game to last, an hour to an hour and a half, and us all just have fun. And I wish that everyone would be on that same mindset.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Chris, I agree with most of that statement. I think, so how you worded that is that you wish we didn't have to have like a Rule Zero conversation. I think a Rule Zero conversation comes with the fact that this is a casual format. And I think maybe your feeling on that is you come from a competitive background where you show up to play a competitive match. You don't care what you're playing against. You do know that your odds against certain deck archetypes are better or worse, for what you're playing. But I think because this is a casual format, it's more about the camaraderie. If we don't have these conversations, you are going to get that turn 3 combo, or you're going to get that Reki deck that sits down against, 3 other precons that literally just got opened and sleeved up. So I think the Rule Zero conversation is 100% needed for our format. What I don't like about it is the number scale. Even a couple years ago when we still had events and Commander and Channel Fireball posted their power scale for command zones, they kind of did 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or whatever, however they broke it up. And sure, that was better than just saying my deck is a 7. They kind of assigned definitions to them. Not the best definitions, but they're making attempts, and I appreciate that. I like Dana's idea of maybe don't assign a number. Say, hey, yeah, I'm playing Isperia Supreme Judge. There's a Tundra, there's a Mana Drain, and, 4 other counter spells, and it's a deck full of Sphinxes. Sphinxes fly. That if I sat down in a pod and the 3 other players gave a Cliff Notes version of their deck, however detailed they want, more than just, I'm playing Korvold and it's a 4. Well, no, Korvold alone I think makes that deck start at a 6. You could be running Korvold elves and you're still gonna probably kick my butt. So I definitely think the Rule Zero conversation is needed. I just think we need to find better ways to have it than just pick a number from 1 to 10. And I think giving these little summaries is a great start towards a better, more enjoyable Commander experience for all players. And yeah, the dream would be to get there to one point and be like, yeah, I'm playing Dragonlord Jamoka. It's a deck full of flyers and Wrath. Okay. Boom. And it's needed because we play with random people. It'd be totally different if we only played with you, myself, Dana, and Dr. Mike every week, twice a week for existence. That's different. That's a totally different, control group you have to look at, because you do know what everybody's building, what everybody plays, and for all we know, they never change their decks. That's totally different than being out at a local game store or at an event when they can finally come back, or playing over a spell table. We need to have these discussions because the more people we can keep in the game, the better. And if it means taking 5 minutes to say, hey, I run a Tundra and a Mana Drain and 4 other counter spells, but that player is going to want to play with me again, I'm all for it.
Okay. Yeah, I can get behind that. I mean, I'm really happy that this is something that we discussed, especially seeing how Wizards did announce, sanction play is coming back in a week now. I think we're out from that.
Yep.
And hopefully within the next 6 months to a year, we get our great big events. So this is something that, I want to get out in everyone's mind again, talking about, doing stuff, which hopefully we all fall into that category I want to fall into, where we just sit back, have fun, I can laugh. I don't have to focus on the game 100%. And, everyone's giving high fives around the table. That'd be awesome.
That's the perfect way for a game to end. High fives around the table. Absolutely. All right, that is going to wrap up this episode of Commander Central. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia, and you can find him at Ursa Bear Walker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We'll be back on Thursday with a deck tech. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.